The social systems of race and gender reinforce a heteronormative culture in the United States. These social systems are built into our culture and are taught to us starting at a very young age, only to be reinforced later in life.
Children are learning about sexuality, specifically heterosexuality, from many different sources throughout our culture. Heterosexuality is everywhere and is portrayed to our children at a very young age. One of these outlets is through our G-rated films. Our movies socially construct heterosexuality by portraying it as something powerful, exceptional, and magical. It is portrayed as being the epitome of what a relationship should look like. Because of this, homosexuality becomes the other against which heterosexuality defines itself. Other practices which are ingrained into our society also help promote a heterocentric viewpoint on our world. Through dances like senior prom, students are taught that their experiences and identities are built through these cultural milestones. Our education system is vital to teaching children about sex and their own sexual identity. Our sex education classes have historically been used to control the sexuality of youth and has continued to be a way to spread only a heterosexual approach to sexuality. This heterosexual approach to sexuality is also very evident in our culture, especially when it comes to the treatment of people based on their gender. It is very evident that we treat individuals differently based on their gender identity, and that shapes our belief on how they should practice sexual health. An example of this is with circumcision, typically practiced on males, and the HPV vaccine, typically given to females. This unequal distribution and reception of these technologies within our culture have created what they call the sexual double standard. Different cultures have created a negative dialogue around these sexual health technologies. Each of these examples show how complicated our cultures are and how our cultural beliefs play a huge role in the way we view sexuality.
Likewise, our heteronormative culture maintains a gendered hierarchy that subordinates females to males. There are numerous challenges to this structure. In particular, people who are transgender or have a gender identity that differs from their assigned sex disrupt cultural expectations that genitals equate to gender. In addition, social situations reinforce the belief that a person's gender should match their genitals, because it signals if it is acceptable to desire that person, even though most of our social interactions are not sexual. As a result, male-bodied females and female-bodied males challenge our heteronormative culture. The social constructionist theory understands that our identities, desires, relationships, and emotions are shaped by our culture. As a result, it is important for underrepresented communities to create new languages that reflect their personal experiences. Like how transgender people challenge our heteronormative culture, language challenges our cultural beliefs about gender and non-normative sexualities. For example, people in polyamorous communities were historically considered to be adulterers. Because the language available perpetuated these false, negative beliefs, polyamorous created a new language that better reflected their self-identities. For decades, feminist activists have lobbied to change the legal definitions of rape and increase penalties for rape. However, these methods have unfavorable effects because it limits the effectiveness of anti-rape campaigns. These campaigns attempt to persuade males to not rape females, but do not focus on rape prevention or its aftermath. For example, courts might rule that rapes were committed, but do not examine whether the increased penalties adversely affected the number of rapes committed. Therefore, our culture perpetuates the belief that females will inevitably be raped. The language of rape has also been structured around historical beliefs of race and gender. For example, white females have been trained to believe African American males are rapists. This has only legitimized sexual violence toward females because white males feel entitled to the sexual services of females as reimbursement for their protection from African American males.
Gender is further socially constructed based on what race you are as well. Heterosexual marriage practices with a gender-conforming couple is the norm, but it is also the norm for those marriages to be between two people of the same race. Interracial marriages are few and far between, and Americans tend to disapprove of their families' interracial marriages. They also talk about the most common interracial marriages, a black man and a white woman, or a white man and an Asian woman, and how these have been deemed the most socially acceptable. Media acts like the integration of black people into popular images is helping to end discrimination, but really all it does is normalize being white. Popular interracial couples in our society tell us that interracial couples can be accepted, but only when they embody ideal masculinity or femininity and when the couple is objectively attractive. Racial stereotypes also shape the dynamics of gender in interracial relationships. For example, Black men are seen as dominant and Asian women are seen as submissive. Another way that race and gender are socially constructed through popular images is through sexual advertising and how different races change how sexuality is portrayed. In sexual advertisements, white bodies are seen as the norm. White men are usually seen in sexy six-pack photos. The hot lesbians in advertisements are often white, gender-conforming women. When Black men are portrayed in sexual advertisements, however, they are represented in a very eroticized and powerful way. The social construction of race and what are seen as the norms can be traced back to slave culture in the United States. White male masters would sexually assault their Black female slaves because they were trying to procreate in order to have more children to work for them. Black women were seen as over-sexualized because of this, and that belief is still ingrained in us today. Black men were seen as very hypersexual, so there was this belief that all they wanted to do was rape white women. This also caused white women's bodies to be seen as off-limits because they were pure and strictly for their husband and no one else. The social constructs of gender and race have been around for a very long time, and they are continuing to stick with us today. We are taught about gender and race at a very young age in the simplest ways, but those ways do continue to reinforce gender and racial stereotypes, which go on to reinforce a heteronormative culture.